Naomi Rivers never imagined that the two people she loved the most, her husband, Asher, and her mother, Lillian, would betray her in the most unthinkable way. But as she stared at the proof of their affair, the gut-wrenching reality set in. It wasn't just a fleeting betrayal. It wasn't just a mistake. Lillian was pregnant with Asher's child. Naomi's world wasn't just shattered. It was obliterated. And now, there was no turning back. Naomi Tressler had always believed she had the perfect life. She was happily married to Asher Vance, a charming and ambitious man who had once been her best friend before they fell in love. Their marriage was filled with laughter, plans for the future, and a sense of stability that made Naomi feel safe. She had spent years trusting him completely, never once doubting his loyalty or love. Alongside Asher, Naomi shared a close bond with her mother, Lillian Castor. Lillian had always been a guiding force in her life, offering wisdom, comfort, and unwavering support. She had raised Naomi as a single mother, teaching her to be independent, strong, and forgiving. When Naomi married Asher, Lillian was overjoyed, welcoming him into their family as if he were her own son. They often spent weekends together, sharing meals and reminiscing about old memories. Naomi took pride in the way Asher and Lillian got along. It was rare for a mother-in-law and son-in-law to be so close, and she often felt grateful that the two most important people in her life had such a strong connection. Naomi never suspected anything unusual. Asher had always been a bit of a workaholic, pouring himself into his career to ensure they lived comfortably. Late nights at the office weren't uncommon, and Naomi had learned to accept that his absence was just part of his job. When he came home exhausted, Lillian reassured her that men often struggled with balancing work and relationships. She reminded Naomi to be patient and understanding, telling her that all marriages had rough patches. Naomi listened, trusting her mother's advice. After all, Lillian had been through so much in life. She knew what she was talking about. Then, small but unsettling changes began to appear. Asher became more distant, his affection toward Naomi growing colder as the days passed. At first, she told herself that stress was to blame. Work was demanding and he had a lot on his plate. But it wasn't just that he was tired. He had become emotionally unavailable. He stopped asking about her day, barely looked at her when they spoke, and avoided intimacy altogether. Naomi noticed the way he flinched when she touched him, as if her presence was suffocating. It wasn't just Asher's behavior that unsettled her. Lillian, too, began acting differently. She had always been protective of Naomi, but now she seemed almost defensive of Asher. Whenever Naomi brought up her concerns about his coldness, Lillian brushed them off, insisting that Naomi was overthinking things. She encouraged her to give Asher space, saying men sometimes needed time to figure things out. Naomi wanted to believe her mother, but a growing sense of unease took root in her mind. Something was wrong, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. One evening, as Naomi was folding laundry, she found a long blonde hair on Asher's jacket. It was strange because her own hair was dark. She tried to ignore it, but doubt crept in. A few days later, she caught a whiff of an unfamiliar perfume on his collar, one she had never worn. She told herself she was imagining things, that her mind was playing tricks on her. But deep down, she knew better. The final straw came when Naomi walked into the kitchen late one night and saw Asher's phone screen light up. He was in the shower, so she instinctively glanced at the message. It was from an unsaved number, and the preview read, "I can't wait to see you again." Her heart pounded in her chest as she reached for the phone, but before she could open the message, the screen went dark. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating her with the weight of her suspicions. Naomi sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone, her mind racing. She had spent years trusting Asher, believing in their love. She had listened to her mother's reassurances, convinced that everything was fine. But now, with every passing day, the cracks in her perfect life were becoming impossible to ignore. She didn't want to believe it, but something told her that the betrayal she feared was far worse than she could ever imagine. Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The message she had seen on Asher's phone haunted her, but she had no proof of anything beyond a gut feeling. She wanted to believe there was a logical explanation, but deep down doubt had taken root. Every small detail that once seemed insignificant now felt like a clue pointing to something dark beneath the surface. Asher's coldness, Lillian's dismissive attitude, the strange hairs and perfume, none of it made sense. Determined to find answers, Naomi started paying closer attention. She noted Asher's schedule, the way he acted when he returned home, the small inconsistencies in his explanations. He had always claimed to be working late, but on a few occasions, she called his office only to be told he had left hours earlier. When she confronted him about it, he brushed her off with vague excuses, insisting he had gone for a drive to clear his mind. Naomi tried to push away the paranoia creeping in, but the more she looked, the more her unease grew. Then there was Lillian. Naomi had always turned to her mother in times of trouble, but now she found herself questioning everything. Lillian was different, more secretive, more defensive. She avoided certain topics, changed the subject whenever Naomi expressed her fears. It wasn't like her. Naomi wanted to believe her mother was simply trying to protect her from unnecessary worry, but the nagging suspicion wouldn't let go. One evening, Naomi decided to follow Asher. She had never done anything like this before, but desperation had pushed her past her own boundaries. She waited until he left for a late meeting and gave him a few minutes before grabbing her car keys and heading out. Keeping a safe distance, she followed him across town, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She expected him to drive toward his office, but instead he turned onto a quiet residential street. Naomi's pulse pounded in her ears as she watched him pull into the driveway of a house she recognized all too well, her mother's. Her stomach clenched as she parked down the street, unable to breathe. There had to be a reason. Maybe he was there to talk to Lillian about a surprise for Naomi. Maybe he needed advice. She wanted to believe that, but deep inside she knew better. She waited, watching as he knocked on the door and stepped inside without hesitation. Minutes passed, then an hour. Naomi sat frozen in her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly. Her fingers ached. She wanted to storm inside, demand answers, force them to explain, but fear kept her in place. She wasn't ready to face whatever truth lay behind that door. When Asher finally emerged, it was nearly midnight. Naomi sank lower in her seat, her breath shallow as she watched him step onto the porch. He turned back for a moment and then, to Naomi's horror, Lillian appeared in the doorway. The way they looked at each other sent ice through Naomi's veins. Lillian reached out, her fingers grazing Asher's arm in an intimate, lingering touch. He responded by leaning in, his hand brushing against her waist before he walked toward his car. Naomi felt sick. The reality of what she was seeing crashed over her like a tidal wave. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't paranoia. Something was happening between them, something no mother and son-in-law should ever share. Tears blurred her vision as Asher drove off, unaware that his wife had witnessed everything. Naomi's heart pounded so hard she thought it might explode. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to run, to forget what she had seen, to pretend this nightmare wasn't real. But she couldn't. The truth was staring her in the face, undeniable and cruel. Her mother, the woman she had trusted more than anyone, was betraying her in the most unforgivable way. And Naomi had no idea how much worse things were about to get. Naomi spent the night in a state of numb disbelief. She couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw them, her husband and her mother, standing together on that porch, their bodies close, their touch intimate. The image was burned into her mind, an unforgivable betrayal that made her stomach twist with nausea. She had never felt so alone. Asher had been her rock, the man she trusted with everything. Lillian had been her foundation, the person she could always count on. Now, the two people she loved most had shattered her world. Naomi wanted to confront them, to scream, to demand answers, but the weight of their deception left her paralyzed. By morning, she forced herself out of bed. She had to do something. She couldn't let this destroy her without knowing the full truth. She needed proof, undeniable evidence that what she had seen was real. A part of her still clung to the desperate hope that there was some kind of explanation, something that could make this nightmare go away. Naomi started searching. She combed through Asher's belongings, looking for anything that could confirm her worst fears. At first she found nothing, but then she checked his laptop. It was locked, but she knew his password. He had trusted her enough to share it once. Her hands trembled as she typed it in, her breath catching when the screen unlocked. Her stomach dropped. Emails, hundreds of them. Some were brief, others long, intimate, and explicit. Messages filled with confessions of love, promises to be together, discussions of how much longer they had to keep their secret. And the worst part, they weren't just recent. They went back months, maybe longer. Her mother had been lying to her for nearly a year. Asher had been cheating for just as long. Every holiday, every family dinner, every time Lillian had reassured Naomi that she was imagining things, it had all been a lie. They had been sneaking around behind her back, pretending nothing was wrong while they built a life of betrayal together. Tears streamed down Naomi's face as she scrolled through the messages. But then, she saw something that made her entire body go cold. I haven't told Naomi yet. I don't know how she'll handle it. We have to be careful. She can't find out until the time is right. And then the final message, one that made Naomi feel as though the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. The baby will change everything. She'll have no choice but to accept it eventually. Naomi's vision blurred. Baby. Her mother was pregnant. A strangled sound escaped her throat as she covered her mouth, gasping for breath. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't just betrayal. Lillian was carrying Asher's child. The man Naomi had vowed to spend her life with had created a family with her own mother. Her heart pounded violently in her chest as she tried to process what she had just learned. Her mother, 50 years old, was having a child with her 33-year-old husband. It was grotesque, sickening beyond comprehension. Naomi felt like the walls were closing in on her, like she was suffocating under the weight of her own devastation. She slammed the laptop shut and stumbled away, her entire body shaking. How could they do this to her? How could the two people she trusted most betray her in the most unthinkable way? Rage boiled beneath her skin, mixing with her heartbreak. She had spent so long ignoring the signs, believing in their lies, letting them manipulate her. But now there was no more denying it. She had the truth, and she was going to make sure they paid for what they had done. Naomi could barely breathe as she paced the floor of her bedroom. Every step felt heavy, her body weighed down by the crushing betrayal. The truth was now undeniable. Her husband and her mother were having an affair, and worse, they were expecting a child together. The walls around her felt suffocating, as if they were closing in with every passing second. She couldn't escape the horrific reality of what she had uncovered. She wanted to scream, to cry, to break everything in sight, but the pain had settled so deeply within her that all she could do was shake. She had spent years believing Asher was the love of her life, the man who would stand beside her through everything. She had trusted her mother more than anyone, seeking comfort and guidance from her. But now, all of that was gone. Everything she had built her life around was a lie. A million thoughts raced through her mind. Should she confront them? Should she leave? Should she expose them for the disgusting betrayal they had committed? Naomi's emotions were a whirlwind. and she could feel herself spiraling deeper into a dark place. But through the chaos of her thoughts, a new feeling emerged, one stronger than the pain, stronger than the sorrow. Rage. She refused to be the victim in this nightmare. She had spent too long ignoring the signs, convincing herself that her suspicions were unfounded. Now that she had the truth, she wouldn't let them get away with it. They had stolen her trust, her love, her life, and she was going to make them suffer for it. Determined, Naomi grabbed her phone and scrolled through the emails again. She needed more than just knowledge. She needed undeniable proof. She took screenshots of every message, every confession, every disgusting promise Asher and Lillian had made to each other. Then she went through his call logs, finding dozens of calls between them at all hours of the night. Naomi wasn't just going to confront them, she was going to expose them. But she needed to be smart. She couldn't just lash out in anger and let them twist the situation. They had already proven how skilled they were at lying. If she wanted justice, she needed a plan. She decided to start with Asher. He was the weakest link. She knew he would panic if he realized he had been caught, and she wanted to see the fear in his eyes before she completely destroyed him. She spent the rest of the day pretending nothing was wrong, even managing to fake a smile when he got home that evening. It made her skin crawl to be near him, but she forced herself to stay calm. Later that night, when Asher was in the shower, Naomi went through his phone. She found text messages confirming everything she had already seen in the emails. But there was one message that caught her attention. "I think she's starting to suspect something. We need to tell her soon." Naomi's blood ran cold. They had been planning to confess, but only when it was convenient for them. Only when they thought. She was too broken to fight back. She clenched her fists. They thought they had control over this situation. They thought she would just accept their betrayal and let them move forward with their twisted new life. They had no idea what was coming. Naomi took a deep breath and walked into the bathroom, standing just outside the shower. She could hear the water running, hear Asher humming to himself as if he hadn't just ruined her entire existence. Her voice was calm, steady, but filled with ice. "Asher," she said, loud enough to be heard over the water. There was a pause. Then the sound of the water turning off. "Get out! We need to talk!" Naomi didn't care how much he begged, how many excuses he tried to make. She was done listening to lies. It was time for the truth. And soon, it would be time for revenge. Asher stepped out of the shower, his face still dripping as he wrapped a towel around his waist. Naomi stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. But beneath her stillness, she was a storm waiting to unleash its fury. She had spent hours imagining this moment, but now that it was here, a cold calm settled over her. Asher didn't know what was coming. He had no idea that every lie, every betrayal, every disgusting secret had been exposed. He still believed he was in control. Naomi reached for her phone and pulled up the screenshots. Without a word, she tossed it onto the counter in front of him. Asher glanced down, his damp fingers scrolling through the messages, and Naomi saw the exact moment realization struck. His face drained of color, his body stiffened, and his mouth parted slightly as if he wanted to say something, but no excuse would be enough. She watched as he struggled, his mind racing to find a way out. But there wasn't one. Not this time. Sharp knock at the door startled them both. Naomi didn't react. She had been expecting it. Asher turned to her, confused, but she said nothing. He wrapped the towel tighter around his waist and walked to the front door, opening it cautiously. Lillian stood there, her expression carefully neutral, but Naomi caught the flicker of worry in her mother's eyes. She had told her to come over, claiming she needed to talk, and now both of them were trapped. Asher stepped aside to let Lillian in, and the moment the door closed, Naomi spoke. "I know everything." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Lillian flinched, her hands tightening around the purse she carried. Asher opened his mouth, but Naomi cut him off with a sharp glare. She let the silence stretch between them, watching as they fidgeted, as guilt seeped into every inch of their being. She wanted them to feel it, to understand what they had done. Finally, she moved to the kitchen counter and picked up a stack of printed messages, emails, texts, every piece of evidence she had collected. She slammed them down onto the table, her heart pounding with adrenaline. "Read them," she ordered. Neither of them moved at first. Lillian's lip trembled, Asher's jaw clenched, but Naomi wasn't giving them a choice. She grabbed the top page and shoved it into Lillian's hands. The older woman's eyes skimmed the words, and a strangled sound escaped her throat. Naomi had imagined this confrontation 1,000 times, but none of those fantasies compared to the real thing. The way they both looked so small, so pathetic, so utterly exposed. It was almost satisfying, but satisfaction wasn't enough. She turned, walked to the living room, and grabbed her laptop. With a few quick clicks, she opened an email draft. "I sent everything to myself," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Every message, every call log, every disgusting confession, and now I have something to send back." She clicked to attach the files, then hovered over a list of email contacts, family, friends, Asher's boss, Lillian's colleagues. She wanted to ruin them the way they had ruined her. Asher panicked first. "Please, Naomi." She turned the screen toward them, letting them see just how easy it would be to expose them to the world. Let them experience the fear she had lived with since uncovering their affair. But then a thought struck her. She had wasted enough of her life on them. Wasted enough tears, enough energy, enough of herself. They weren't worth it. With a slow, deliberate movement, she deleted the email draft and shut the laptop. "I won't send it," she said, her voice steady. "Not because you deserve mercy, but because I don't want to waste another second on either of you." Lillian let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her face. Asher's shoulders sagged. They thought they were getting away with it. Naomi stepped forward, looking them both in the eye. "Get out of my life," she said. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need to destroy them. They had already destroyed themselves. And Naomi? She would rebuild, without them.